Whether you're a Gen 1er, a master of the Smogon-approved metagame, or even if you have no idea what I'm talking about at all, everybody is at least somewhat familiar with the Pokémon series. The games have collectively sold just under 300 million copies worldwide, making it one of the best-selling video game franchises of all time. Despite its simple origin as a late 90s fad, the series' popularity is yet to slow down. It's only within the last 4 years that it's even had series competition to deal with. Even the anime series is approaching 1,000 episodes. That's longer than One Piece. The first few iterations saved the Game Boy, and its later generations would go on to be the biggest drivers of sales for their own respective portable devices. But why is it that these games are so popular? It's had parents scratching their heads for years, and I don't think that the community has given it enough thought either. Just saying it's because the games are really good doesn't explain anything. Plus, there are plenty of great games out there that haven't been anywhere near as financially successful or as influential. In looking at the series, I'm hoping to find some potential link between the basic structures of these games and their lasting success. I'm not looking so much at individual titles as much as I'm focused on extracting what I can from the series overall, so that we can figure out why it works so well consistently with each new release. At its core, these games are Japanese RPGs through and through, even if their style is a bit unconventional. With that said, let's begin this analysis by examining the genre itself. JRPGs draw players in with their fantasy worlds, and they keep them engaged by emphasizing the interpersonal human drama that's associated with the cast of characters. It's the modern era's equivalent to mythological hero stories. For the most part, developers of other genres have yet to go as far as those of JRPGs to integrate story into the overall experience of their games. It's important to understand this because it strengthens the genre before we even take gameplay into account. The reason why an immersive story is so vital to the success of JRPGs is because players are looking to live out a certain type of fantasy when they play these games. Typically, the fantasy can be most closely associated with becoming a hero who saves the world, which is symbolic of the real-life transition into adulthood. This is why the heroes in these stories are often adolescents who are just coming of age. The sudden transition of the world around them from peaceful to chaotic is the representation of your own worldview shifting as the unknown manifests itself and shatters your previous understanding of what's real and what's not. The villain who's at the center of the world's decline is usually the personification of your own insecurities in response to the changing environment. By challenging the villain, you're actually taking on your own inner demons and coming face to face with your own flaws. Saving the world is analogous to restoring your own mental state after having adjusted to the harsh nature of reality itself. While most JRPGs are dedicated to upholding this basic template for writing, Pokémon is quite unique in that it doesn't really do that. Or if it does, its approach is very different. It may borrow elements from that setup, but it's never really the focal point of the games overall. And that's actually the point that I'm getting to. It uses a different approach to engage the player, but it's not random either. If there was no rhyme or reason to it at all, it wouldn't resonate with players as well as it does. Think about the audiences of these games. It's primarily kids and nostalgic adults who grew up with them. That tells you a lot right there. It isn't just happenstance that these games continue to sell as well as they do. They're tapping into a certain something that's innately relatable to multiple age groups. It's something I'll call the PreHeroes Fantasy. Before, we talked about the hero's fantasy as an allegory for learning how to act in the world once you've come to terms with the fact that it operates very differently from how you viewed it when you were younger. This fantasy, on the other hand, is the worldview that is eventually taken apart by reality later in life. That's the reason the player character is younger than the typical hero in other mythological tales. And it's also the reason why the story has as many oddities as it does. On the surface, the world of Pokémon doesn't look drastically different from the real one. The societies of each region contain modern cities, advanced technology, and relatable cultures, at least once you get past the whole magical animals thing. But that's where the similarities with the real world end. When you really think about it, very little about these games makes sense at all, until you begin to see it from the PreHero Fantasy's perspective. As depicted in the games, the Pokémon universe is practically utopian. Hang on, we'll get there. Anyway, the citizens live out very simple and remarkably peaceful lives, and there are rarely serious problems that they have to face. So right off the bat, the game doesn't hit you with as many conflicts as other games do, at least not through its environment. After being given your first Pokémon, you head off on a grand adventure. You can then discover and capture new Pokémon, train them up, and use them to win battles. Your goal as a Pokémon trainer is to rise to the top as the region's champion. This is accomplished by winning the Pokémon League contest. By traveling the world, you'll encounter 8 professional trainers known as gym leaders, and when you defeat them, you'll earn badges which act as proof of your victory. After collecting all 8 of the region's badges, you're allowed to challenge the Elite Four, the region's best Pokémon trainers, for a chance at becoming the Pokémon League champion yourself. Sun and Moon deviate from this slightly, but the end result is still the same. And that's basically it. It's not about saving the world or figuring out how to correct your own flaws, it's about competition and the pursuit of your own ambitions. The world isn't crumbling around you, it's just territory to conquer as a Pokemon trainer. Everything from the setting of these games to the ways in which the NPCs interact with each other and with the player indicates that they're fictitious manifestations of a naive and childlike worldview. While exploring the routes between towns, NPC trainers just stand there and wait for you to show up so they can battle you. Even when they're active, they're usually just running around in circles. They're not on quests of their own, they're just there for you to knock out as you walk along the road. It's a product of the belief that the environment revolves around you, which is something you eventually grow out of, but since this game is designed to depict a more idealistic perspective, it operates by its own rules. This holds especially true for the more important NPCs as well. There's always a mom character who doesn't pose any kind of obstacle towards you heading out on your own. It said so on TV, after all. Okay, that's convenient. The rival once played the role of introducing incremental goals to the player, as he was always one step ahead of you, showing you what you could achieve if you just worked a little harder to keep up. More recently, that role has been seriously diminished. Most of the games lack a central father figure, so this is often replaced by the hometown's professor, at least most of the time. Even with his years of accrued wisdom and his gifted intellect, he's only useful for giving you your first Pokemon and sending you off. He tasks you with filling up the Pokedex and encourages you to seek adventure in a fatherly way, but that's the only role he's actually there to serve. When looking at each game's hometown, it's usually very basic. For example, Pallet Town consists of your own home, your rival's house, and the lab. That's it. It's kind of like looking at your own hometown and just extracting from it the places that have always interested you the most. Having discussed some of the central characters, we still haven't addressed the real stars of these games, the Pokemon themselves. What exactly are Pokemon from a design perspective? All that really matters is that they're magical creatures. They're a source of wonder in and of themselves. It's their unique designs and capabilities in battle that motivate players to capture them. They evolve by transforming into more powerful creatures, which actually does make sense in this context because it reflects a rudimentary understanding of what evolution actually is. So it fits right in with every other absurdity you see in these games. The entire world is centered on these creatures. Every aspect of life in some form or another involves Pokemon. Imagine if everything revolved around animals in the real world. I mean, aside from the internet's weird obsession with cats. I know I'm probably looking too deeply into it because the franchise exists specifically to highlight these creatures, but it's still fascinating to see how it all plays out. While breaking these games apart to see what they're all about, we've rebuilt them into a fantasy containing monsters that inhabit an otherwise familiar world. But that still doesn't leave us with a guideline for how to interact with it. You can't go straight from there to the intricate systems associated with these games. The existence of these creatures doesn't immediately lend itself to the idea of capturing them and organizing them into parties for battle. So we need to find that causal link. In order to figure this out, we'll have to use a couple of environmental clues. As is the case with many other JRPGs, the main character is a silent protagonist, meaning that there is no separate personality given to them. This is done so that the player can project themselves into the game by playing the role of an avatar. If the main character was chatty and their personality didn't match your own, it wouldn't be as easy to create that sense of immersion. Recall the game console that's always present in the main character's room. Most players just assume it's a fun little Easter egg, but it's one of the few clues in this game to unravel their personality because it sits there before you even start playing the game. Think about being that age again, discovering JRPGs with complex magic systems on your new Nintendo console, and also taking an interest in the animal kingdom at the same time. I would argue that the adventure depicted in the Pokemon world is analogous to the act of dreaming up a fantasy video game universe in the real world and acting it out. In some sense, it's like a game within a game. This is why some parts of the world look realistic, and others, not so much. It's not a perfect abstraction, as it builds this fantasy on top of a more believable environment, but it's a realization of the desire to live out your video game experiences in reality. This is also why the world is as peaceful as it is. Not yet, we'll get there. As we were saying, by acting this out, you're projecting your imagination onto the environment, hence the strange mix of realism and fantasy. Looking to the Pokemon battle system itself, it's heavily rooted in the traditional turn-based combat of other JRPGs. The party members are the Pokemon you've chosen to capture in the wild. The equivalent to a mana system is based on elemental advantages and disadvantages. Fire burns grass, grass absorbs water, and water puts out fire. Ice types defeat flying types because birds fly south for the winter. Dark types are weak against bug types because many bugs thrive in the dark. You get the general idea. The point is that the overall fantasy has to be constructed using some set of rules, and those rules need to be simple to understand, even if they don't really make much sense beyond their basic utility here. Most battles are fought one-on-one, and if a Pokemon faints, the trainer is forced to bring out the next one until all of their Pokemon are defeated. The faster Pokemon moves first, and from there, the turns alternate. There's no use in making quick decisions because you have all the time you need to select your moves, so your choice of strategy is vital. Impulsive decision making won't get you very far, but it's very easy to figure out what moves will work in your favor and which ones will work against you. You also have the option to switch out your Pokemon for one that's better suited elementally to take on your current foe. Of course, there's another major aspect to these games that I've yet to address. So far, we've reconstructed these games into a fantasy associated with acting out your own favorite video games in the real world. But this leaves out an important detail. It would have been just as easy to do this using more of a conventional setting reminiscent of other JRPGs. But that's not the case in Pokemon. Added to everything else, it's also about inserting your hobby into the world as well. In this case, the hobby is that of collecting. But instead of collecting baseball cards, you're collecting Pokemon and commanding them in a battle system that stems from previously existing franchises. In addition to their function as recruits to the battlefield, Pokemon are also traded between players. The reason for this is that there needs to be a mechanism put in place that encourages socialization, because the whole point of the fantasy is to learn how to interact with the world. At this point, we've taken the concept of real-world hobbies and combined them with the technical systems associated with video games in order to produce this strange world. But what's the end goal of this experiment? Well, once you've created this universe, the only thing that's left to do is to conquer it. By becoming the very best, like no one ever was. That's why the end goal is as straightforward as it is. Work your way to the top and become the region's Pokemon champion. Sounds simple enough, but we still haven't addressed the evil crime syndicates associated with each game. Yes, now we're getting to you guys. Every game has a group of villains whose goals usually involve stealing Pokemon and hunting after the region's legendaries. At first glance, it seems strange to insert actual villains into a fantasy universe that's otherwise a fully functional utopia. But the bad guys of these games are pushovers. They're just there to be punching bags. You break into their secret hideout and defeat them all, including their leader, completely on your own. You battle your Pokemon against theirs, and when you win, they just stand there and admit defeat. Keep in mind that the original Team Rocket was basically a mafia-like organization that doubled as a multi-regional corporation. And yet the entire organization is toppled because a kid waltzes in and uses his magical creatures to defeat their magical creatures. The whole concept of it is ridiculous. Usually the villains in hero stories are taken a little more seriously. This is because the transitioning adolescent knows what's in store for them if they face their fears, and they're not too happy about it. In Pokemon, however, the villains are just a nuisance. Admittedly, their roles have been fleshed out in more recent games, but having to face them is still just a diversion from the main goal. This is another example of the game's naive interpretation of reality. It's a delusional outlook that suggests you're the one who can just walk in and defeat the bad guys because the good guys always win and you're the good guy. Because it's such a simplistic perspective, you're playing the role of a wannabe hero who just comes in and saves the day without having to go through any serious transformation. Space. Time. Earth. Sea. Life. And destruction. These are all deep topics for people to think about at any stage in life. And each one of these ideas is represented by a particular legendary Pokemon. It's a personification of transcendent ideas, much like the gods of polytheistic religions. While you're taking on the boss of the crime syndicate for the last time, you're usually put into contact with one of these creatures. Just as you've beaten the odds by single-handedly saving the world with minimal effort, reality rears its ugly head, showing you just how little you actually know. You can make the argument that this encounter is the precursor to the traditional hero story. Because you've constructed this fantasy universe to master without a proper understanding of reality, the story has thus far been put together incoherently. But at the end of the road, you briefly start to question the environment around you. Your unconscious mind then puts these concepts together and integrates them into the fantasy, providing a layer of depth that hadn't previously been there. The deity stares you down and challenges you to justify this ego that you've developed along the way, putting your whole journey into perspective. And then you catch it in an Ultra Ball. This creature is the physical embodiment of that which created space itself, and now it's a trophy. So we still haven't quite escaped from this delusional worldview yet. But we did go on a great adventure, we took on great challenges, and we even managed to put a stop to world domination, all before rising to the top as the new Pokemon champion. Traditional hero stories will always have their place in various media, as they're easily relatable to the obstacles and uncertainties that we do face later in life. But sometimes it's nice to take a break from it all. Maybe you were a bit overconfident in your own abilities, but it's that youthful idealism that gave you the courage to face the real world later on. and that's really what makes Pokemon a special series. Not only are the games themselves nostalgic, but the themes depicted within them bring you back to a different era, when you felt that life would be simpler than it actually turned out to be. It's not very often that we're able to embark on a journey from the perspective of somebody who doesn't quite understand how the world works and still hasn't even made that transition by the end. To play these games is to remember the old days, as they seek to recapture the glory of youth, which is the essence of the PreHeroes Fantasy. And it's for that reason that Pokemon has made as large of an impact as it has. But when all is said and done, that's what makes these topics so much fun to talk about. Thank you for listening to me ramble on about games incoherently for all this time. If you like these types of videos, hit that subscribe button, and since you're in the area, check out these two videos as well. In any event, thanks again for watching. See you next time!